to We Need to Name This, where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academe with scholars of color. I'm Ebony Pruse Harvey and my co-host,
Laura Ann Jacobs.
Today's episode is entitled Leaving Academia. But before we get started, we'd like to introduce an amazing Black woman scholar, Dr. Tabitha Bentley. She's going to share her experiences with us, but first we'd like to share a little bit about her. Dr. Tabitha Bentley is Director of Policy and Research at the Education Trust Midwest. A passionate leader about systemic change in education, Dr. Bentley is dedicated to creating the best conditions for educational success for students of color and students living in poverty. Dr. Bentley is an executive strategist and applied research and policy practitioner. She has extensive experience in research on educator and collective commitment, race in education, and the use of multi-sector partnerships towards educational change. She recently worked as a senior researcher for Basis Policy Research. She also previously served in a dual role as a strategy director for Washtenaw County, My Brother's Keeper, and research and strategy facilitator for Washtenaw Intermediate School District. Before her education leadership roles, she served as an 8th grade teacher in multiple large urban districts, a college counselor at Urban Prep Charter Academy for Young Men, a human capital recruitment coordinator for Chicago-based Sativas Education Partners, and an Education Pioneers Fellow working within Chicago Public Schools to investigate, analyze, and create a comprehensive strategy to equitably serve students with more severe special needs. Dr. Bentley holds a bachelor's degree in social policy from Northwestern University, as well as a master's degree in public policy and a PhD in education administration and policy from the University of Michigan. She's also an accomplished musician and continues to teach and perform as a pianist and a violinist. So thank you so much, Dr. Bentley, for joining us today.
You're welcome. I feel like you need to take a sip of water after that.
Oh. I hope I read it well with passion. Okay.
Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Bentley. And may I ask you have a preference with how we refer to you in our interview?
Tabitha is fine.
Okay. We just have to check, respect your accomplishments after a bio like that too. So I'll let you know, we've been starting each of our episodes by asking the introductory question, what led you to academia, graduate school to begin with? If you could share a little bit about the decision-making that started you on the journey that you're on now.
Yeah, that's a super interesting question because I would say I was odd in that I always knew that I would likely do a PhD. And that's because I have a lot of influences in my family that pretty much said, this is what you're doing. And I also had a love for education. I come from a long line of educators, principals, superintendents, both here in the US and abroad. I'm a child of a Black immigrant family. So education has been a large part of our life, not just from getting an education, but also working within education to better the lives of other people and to serve other people. So that was modeled for me extensively when I was growing up. And I just remember thinking, I want to teach at the collegiate level, even as a kid, which is crazy. But I think what changed for me along the way, however, was just how I understood education and understanding what I actually wanted to do with a higher degree, with a higher degree. I first thought it was teaching and being Professor Tabitha, but once I started to experience education for myself and just seeing a ton of inequities within our education system and experiencing them myself as well, I wanted to understand why things were happening the way they were, why things were the way they were. And I also wanted to work towards changing that through the questions and the research I was doing. So it wasn't necessarily just about, being in front of the classroom and being this great scholar and person that was just sharing and disseminating information. It was really about how do I ask really great questions and really helpful questions, I should say, to change the system and bring people along towards that. So in terms of like my pathway and how I got there, one of my favorite teachers, her name is Miss Sandra Chico, She was my high school AP economics teacher. And when I told her what I wanted to do, she's like, Tabitha, do not go into education policy or working in higher education without working on the grounds first. And I literally took her advice, and that advice has guided a lot of my pathway. So after I got my undergrad in social policy, I went and I worked in the classroom. I worked as a college counselor at an all-boys school for a while. I worked in Miami while I was in undergrad as through the Breakthrough organization, and taught in Miami for a little bit. I worked at a district level. I worked with the charter school network and worked in their human resource department. And I was recruiting teachers and recruiting administrators to work within a network of charter schools within the Chicago area. So got a view of what it means to work at a district level or within a network of schools to support schools and what they do. And so just getting a really well-rounded view and perspective of how education works, the various aspects of education, and being very thoughtful about just gathering that information to help me understand how does this system work and how do the things come together to form the things that we see and what students see from their purview. So that ultimately led me to applying to grad school. And in terms of decision making, if I'm just being super honest with you, decision making was really about funding. It was really about how can I pursue this degree and how can I pursue the work that I see as valuable and want to do, and also, be able to do so without having to worry about where my funding is coming from, having to worry about, will I be able to finish? Because I absolutely wanted to and needed to finish. And so for me, a large part of my decision was really about funding. And ultimately the school I chose had the best package. I also had a really great conversation with my advisor initially, and that stood out to me as well. So I thought, there are many things here that are clearly opening the door to something that could be great. And it did turn out to be a really great fit.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm so interested by your comment. You're like, oh, even when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be an education professor. Like, it's just.
I was a nerd, y'all. Like, I love it.
It's endearing.
Like, I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what my mom was doing, but clearly she's like, it worked.
Well, a question that I have for you is, when did you make the decision that you didn't want to be Professor Tabitha, well, you're still Dr. Bentley, but Professor Tabitha, the education professor, and work in a non-academic job?
Actually, before I went into grad school,
Okay.
and it was part of my conversation with my advisor. I think she could tell very early on that I did not intend to have a clear pathway in academia. And I'll be honest, I didn't know a lot about just the culture of the academy, and that, in many areas in the academy and many institutions, like you don't necessarily reveal that information because you want to, have certain opportunities, you want access to certain things. And if that's revealed, that could hinder that in some way. So I had no understanding of this early on. So I was very candid with her and open with her, but she was actually open to hearing that and open to me exploring that. And I also feel like that's very rare. So I will not say that like my case is what's general and what's normal. I think I was very, very blessed to have an advisor that understood why I was coming to do the degree I was coming to do, understood that I was very focused in that and how I wanted to apply that. And she was supportive of that. So before I came in, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I also worked at a school district for 4 of the 5 years that I was in grad school. And they end up being the school district that I was hired full-time by when I graduated.
So I think maybe a lot of people who watch this may relate, which is like, I just did this thing and I didn't know I wasn't supposed to say that, that I was interested or not interested in saying. I was fortunate or blessed to be able to work with people who supported me regardless. Has been something that I've heard from others. I'm wondering, and I heard some caution in your, like, know that that's rare. So,
Mhm.
maybe, protect yourself if that's the decision that you want to make, for access to resources and opportunities and things like that. I hear that. Um, and so I am wondering if you could share a little bit about how you feel like being upfront early on helped to shape your trajectory to advocate for yourself.
Mhm.
A lot of higher ed programs prepare you for future faculty. That's what we're preparing you to do. If you want to do something else, you have to figure that out on your own.
Mhm.
So how did you advocate for yourself and navigate like your needs with the very specific goal that you had in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think Laura Ann, you picked up on my hesitancy, and not hesitancy, but my caution. And because I do want to make a case to be sure that it's understood that I don't think my case was um, uh, normal or average, and that I did have an advisor that really supported me from the beginning in terms of that decision to not pursue an academic career. And what that meant and what that looked like for me is that I really was vocal about like what I wanted to do and where I really felt that my talents could be used, and also the types of training and courses I needed in order to get to that point. And she was pretty much like, okay, like she did not push back. And I made some very stark decisions during my time. So one of those was I chose to pursue an MPP while I was in my education program. So while I was doing my PhD full time, I also was doing a full-time master's program in the policy school. And so that is as an advisor, like I would have been scared. My students said, I'm going to do this because it meant taking on additional courses. It meant, time that I could have spent on, PhD work or connecting to other, faculty members on their project. Like I sacrificed a lot of that time. And so, but even so, she was very supportive because I saw that I needed the perspectives of the different schools that I was a part of. So the education school had a very one way of looking at education that particularly centered teaching and learning. However, when you move over to a policy school, it's not always simply about teaching and learning. It's now about the money. It's now about the budget. It's now about the legislature and what's being passed in policy. It's now about the politics, like very different conversations. And for me, I saw that if I wanted to be a well-equipped education policy, not just practitioner, but researcher, and joining those two things together and strategically doing so, I needed both perspectives. And so she supported me doing a degree in both, which was very wild, but very worth it. I mean, I also chose to work. I was working pretty feverishly while I was doing multiple degrees, but I saw again, like being able to apply the work that I was doing within a school district, while I was reading about how schools are organized, while I was reading about just the various changes within policy. At the time, Detroit was putting together this like one semester, Detroit was putting together this coalition. And so while I was reading about that, I was literally working with someone that was supporting the coalition at the school district. Like there was just so many overlaps to what I was learning and what I was able to apply my knowledge to within the school district. And that to me, again, was invaluable. And again, that takes away from how you can engage in the academy, from, the projects you might have access to, the people you might have access to. But I sacrificed that, and I said, this is kind of the path where I think that is best for me. And she supported that. So for me, like, it was being vocal, it was being really steadfast in the vision that I had for myself, even when it was very, very unpopular. And when it meant sacrificing a lot of more traditional ways of engaging in the academy. And to that, I will also say, like, there are things that I walked away after doing my degree and after completing them that I was like, man, I wish I would have done that. So like some of those sacrifices paid off very well. Some of them, like, in retrospect, I'm like, man, I wish I would have done that. So it was, give and take. So some decisions were great, and I think others were you learn after you move forward.
Thank you for sharing. Master's in public policy and working, and you
It's
finished in 5 years.
fun.
Oh, yeah.
Killing the game, right?
Oh, wow. I really aspire for that level of like just clarity and purpose. So I do appreciate you sharing that. And um, for me, I wonder for people who, um, may heed the caution of be careful on how open or how forthright you are, until you're sure that you have that support.
Mm,
The clarity piece is what I'm hearing from you is like, I want to pursue this PP. I want to pursue this like other degree while I'm doing this one because it will help me with this thing. I
mhm,
want to be having this particular job because it will help me in this way. And not just because it will help me benefit me, because I want to learn and engage like
mhm.
as wholly as I can in those things. So those are some things I'm picking up that may, you know, that may advice for other people as well. I don't know if you have things you want to add to that before I slide back over to Ebony.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are two things I would definitely, I think definitely come from my story, like having that clear purpose, having that clear vision for yourself. And I'd also add to that, not losing yourself in the process. PhD programs are long, long endeavors, and it's easy to get lost in that process. It's easy to, and you're literally coming before a committee of 3 to, was it 5 or 7? I don't know, however many people are in your committee, where their opinions are literally going to guide the direction of your work. And it's very easy to get lost in this way or this, perspective. And yes, like they're there to enhance the work. They're there to get you to the end goal in the most ideal situation. But I also feel that it's easy to get lost in that. It's easy to lose who you are in that, because yes, those are their opinions, their perspectives, but you still have to remember, like, who are you? Why did you start this work? Where does this question come from? Like so much of that is still you, even though other people's perspective are guiding what you do. So I would say, just being very careful of grounding yourself, centering yourself, and just knowing very clearly what you want.
Thank you.
So that makes me think of a question in terms of the conversation you and Lauren are having about having like a really clear vision, right? When did you decide, okay, I'm going to take classes or get a degree at the policy school? Did you come in and say, okay, I got accepted to Michigan. I want to do bop, 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 bop. And the first day you came in, you're like, advisor, bop, 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 bop. This is what I'm doing. Or was it like, okay, I'm learning some things in these courses and I need to have this knowledge. So let me see what the policy school is doing. Like, how did that process happen for you? Did you come in like guns blazing, or you were like, okay, I'm developing my goals over time and now I see clearly what I want to do?
It was not guns blazing, even though that sounds a lot cooler. But I would say the backstory to that was, as an undergrad, I completed the Junior Summer Institute with the Public Policy International Affairs fellowship. So what that did was, I was in a policy school for undergrad, and what the JSI program did was it connected undergrad policy students to graduate schools in public policy, to go to various institutions for an entire summer and to study policy and take courses around policy policy disciplines. So economics, statistics, like we were taking statistics and economics for a summer. Like we were optionally doing that. And so with that program, they had a direct connection with, higher ed institutions around like a fellowship. So if you completed the program, they also had potential for fellowships for a master's program in public policy to those schools that you connected to. So in my mind, I already knew that, public policy was very interesting to me. I had spent a lot of time and had put a lot of effort into just connecting to schools and public policy as I was thinking that might be a direction I want to go. But ultimately, like when I decided to apply to graduate school, I was like, I actually want to do some deep research. I want to, take some time to understand some things a bit better. And so I applied as a PhD student. But then once I got there, I was like, oh, wait, y'all, what happened to this? And what happened to this? And they're like, oh, if you want to do that, you need to go to the policy school. And so that at that point, I was like, okay, so I think I need to do both of these at the same time because I see value in both of them. So it was more of a like, I had the prior experience of engaging in policy work and doing that type of coursework. And when I came to the ed school, it was very different than what I expected. I enjoyed it, but I also knew there was something missing. So I was able to connect those two dots.
Yeah. And it seems just from reading your bio that you basically, that has worked for you. The connection that you were able to make has worked for you in different capacities, different places that you work. It ties both the education and the policy together very well. So I want to start with, so I remember you came back for someone's dissertation and you were like, ask you, oh, Tabitha, what you up to, blah, blah. And you were like, oh, I'm doing some consulting work. And I was just like, ooh, that sounds interesting. So tell us a bit about some independent consulting that you've been doing. After leaving academia, how did you get started? And like, were you able to keep like a steady flow of clients, or was it just something that you did here on the side? Like, what was your foray, I guess, into consulting work?
Yeah. I guess I'll start with the back end of your questions with that first. So you asked how I got started in consulting work. So I will say, I actually got started in not the most favorable of conditions. So I was in a position at an organization where I was really, I had some issues, particularly with how they treated me as a Black woman on some issues. And I left unexpectedly. It was not a part of my, 5-year plan or whatever year plan. And I was thinking like, okay, what do I want to do right now? And I've always known that I wanted to start my own business or at least start consulting in some way. And so once I got to that position, I was like, okay, maybe this is the time to do it. Even though I hadn't created that plan or hadn't decided that this was the moment I was going to do it, given the circumstance, I was like, well, we're here. So I just decided to do it. I didn't know much about creating a business plan. I had no idea how to create a business, particularly in the state of Michigan or anywhere. So it was a lot of research, a lot of just knowledge building up front to get myself familiar with what to do and just doing it and jumping in, because I think that was definitely the scariest part, just starting. Not having that plan as I normally do with so many other things. And so I got started. I decided that I really wanted just to help organizations, particularly around connect strategic work and connecting particularly institutions that served education within some sector or some way. So whether that was you're supporting schools in some way, or maybe you're supporting an early childhood center, or maybe you're supporting the education of fellows in some way. And these are all like clients that I've had. And these were some of the path and some of the work that they were doing. I wanted to use my skills and abilities around strategic planning and strategic work, as well as like being able to do some really great evaluation and program evaluation work to help fuel what they were doing. And so the consulting work that I did was really about that. How do you know what it is that you want to do and where you want to go? How do you actually become those things and do what you need to do in order to get that work done? And so I initially was thinking, okay, this might take a while to actually find clients and to find people that be interested in working with me. But I was very surprised at how receptive some folks were. And within the first month of operation, I had secured like at least $40,000 worth of client work, which was like surprising to me because I had started with I don't even know where to start as a business. So I think it was just telling to me of like, when you know what skills that you have, when you know how that can connect to what people are doing and where they want to go, you can absolutely provide an added value and added service to what they're doing. And now I do some consulting work. I don't do as much. I don't have as much time. So I definitely have that, ability to go back and to, use that business and use my umbrella of my business to pursue any consulting work that I do choose to take on. But it was an invaluable lesson of just like starting from scratch and just jumping in and believing that something would come together, even when I didn't have the best context or circumstance or even plan to do so.
So I'm wondering, how did you get your clients? So maybe you said, okay, I'm going to make some phone calls to organizations that I know they're doing this critical work, or you have contacts at, your university and you're like, okay, I've worked with these people before. Let's see if they need help or support. How did you go about getting clients or even just starting to get your name out there to be able to support organizations?
Yeah. So most of my clients were folks that I had worked with in some capacity before. So whether that was, through our paths had crossed through some of the district work that I've done with them before, whether our paths had crossed through just some fellowships that I had been a part of. So just using my own network of folks that I knew and knowing what they wanted to do. And also seeing, because I had relationships with them, I could kind of see some areas where they needed support, particularly around some strategy work, particularly around some evaluation work. So being able to already have that relationship and seeing what they wanted to do and seeing where some of those gaps was, I was able to say, hey, I know this is your goal, but I think you need this. Can we have a conversation around how I can maybe support that? And that was how I largely got most of my clients. And even still today, it's mostly my network that I work with.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is that it's really important to build those relationships while you're in graduate school. So whether you are deciding to go the academic route or you're deciding to go a non-academic route, it's really important to build relationships in the area where you want to eventually go.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's relationships are key, no matter what direction you want to go, no matter what you want to do. And not just building relationships for, just in case later I need this person, genuinely want to know what people are doing, generally want to, support them even when there isn't an end goal or something in it for you. I think just learning how to be supportive of people particularly people that you align with in values and work with, just learning to be supportive in that and building relationships that way.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So that's really, really helpful because I've really been thinking about consulting work myself. So this is right on time. So now I want to talk a bit about other organizations you work for that are just non-academic jobs. I wanted to understand or learn more about what the interview process is. So academia has its own interview process. And when you're in non-academic jobs, you also have a different process. So can you tell us a bit about how folks might prepare to go out there and apply for a non-academic job and then interview for one?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because I'm actually just completing an interview process for someone that might join my team. So I'm trying to turn the question around, okay, how do I coach someone on what was important in that process? But one thing that I would encourage before you even start an interview process, and that was very helpful to me, particularly as I was transitioning between a job or looking for something or seeing something and wanted to respond quickly, doing the pre-work before you even get to that point is extremely important. I think I will stress that, you don't want to be applying for a job and that's the first time that you've thought about, okay, what skills do I have? Okay, how do I answer? That's something that's pre-work that you need to do before you get there. And so one thing that I personally did within the last 2 years was I actually worked with a career coach for a couple of sessions because I was okay, I'm moving from a undergrad space where I worked, directly in schools to more of an executive space where I'm now working with leaders and am a leader myself. I just needed to kind of shift my own mindset around what are the things that I'm bringing to the table? How do I articulate those things? So one of the things that I did in my pre-work was work with a coach. As part of that, I really started to understand, like, what are the skills I have? What are the stories I have? What are things that I know I want to do on my next job that I need to be able to speak to very well about? So again, all of that is pre-work that it's hard to do that on the spot immediately. So I would definitely encourage folks just to start with that pre-work before you even get to the job. Just start to build that out for yourself. And then when you are interviewing, being very clear in your stories. It's even so right now I lead a data team, and you can talk about data all you want to, but like the stories are really what people remember when they leave your interviews. So being able to talk about your skills and connect them to the stories that you have is really important. I would also say something else that has been important is being able to, like for me, especially nowadays, is really being able to speak to the population you're looking to serve. So in my work, we specifically advocate for students of color. We advocate for students living in poverty. We advocate for just more vulnerable students within our education system. And so I look for people that can speak to that. Even if that's not your experience, I want to know, how do you understand these things? And what are you bringing to the work that can enhance what we're doing? Even as whether you're a person of color or not a person of color, whether you're someone that grew up in that circumstance or did not, it's very important to understand how you relate to those experiences and your own experience, given the task that we have, and particularly on my team, which is looking at education from an equity lens. So yeah, just thinking about the audience that you have, whether it's a population that you're looking to serve, and really understanding how you relate to it and being able to speak to that well and doing that pre-work, I think are some things that I'd really say are important.
Yeah, you bring a really important point. Sometimes we go through a PhD program and we've had some experience working before, and we're not quite sure what skills we have. You know what I'm saying? We just think about, okay, I've decided to leave the academic track, but I'm not even sure like what my skills are. And there's a ton of skills folks have, but it just hasn't been articulated in ways that speak to non-academic jobs. So yeah, definitely following Tabitha's advice, makes so much sense, because you need to know how the skills that you have translate to outside of academia. And then
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No worries. I was just gonna say, and the skills that you built before you even came to academia. Right?
Absolutely. And there are a lot of skills. Like if you sat down and you went through every class that you experienced in your PhD, and you just listed out skills that you developed, I think you would be surprised as to just how much you learned, because we're so focused on the product at the time, like the paper or doing the research. Like we're so focused on that, but like when you are able to pan out and you're really to like reflect on what you did, like I think you were often surprised by the skills that we build. And so I would just encourage folks, even while you're in programs, to like create a list of skills that you're developing within your classes, and be proactive, so that when you get to the end of your program and you're thinking about jobs, like you've already started to track some of those things and you've already started to articulate some of those things so that you have something to run with.
Yeah. Thanks so much. So I'm going to pass it off to Laura Ann to give us our wrap-up question.
Yeah. I loved also, Tabitha, to hear you talk about pre-work, because I think when I've heard people say prepare for an application or prepare for an interview, that language usually means like get your cover letter set, get your little statement written, rehearse your answers to some questions. And what you are saying sounds to me very different than that. I mean, it's related, but it's very much going back to the clarity, know your purpose, know your strengths, and be grounded in it, instead of just like trying to get the answers to the questions or try to get your documents all set up. That's part of the pre-work. We're talking about the pre-work. We're talking about what you do. Yes. Yeah. So I really appreciate hearing that. And also the advice, I wish I were a few years ago so I could write down, do the tracking of the what skills am I learning in my courses, and I'm going to take that course because it will help me develop in this way, like that. It'll help me learn that way. So I hope that other people are at a phase now where they can take that up, like right now in the moment. I did have a question. You mentioned a job coach, a career coach, and I was
Yeah.
wondering how you that's a new thing to me. So I was wondering how you found someone or pursued someone, or how you learned about that, because that's something I'm very unfamiliar with.
Yeah. So the person that I connected to, I actually worked with her prior to in my pre-graduate school life. And she had moved on to create her own business and her own coaching business. So that's how we connect. And we've always stayed connected through like social media, all of that. And so she already knew a lot of my story. And so it was very easy for me to work, into a coaching relationship with her, because in many respects, in one of my previous jobs, she was one of my direct reports. So she knew a lot about me already. So I would say, I have seen just a growth in the amount of like career coaches or personal coaches, and just the availability of people that are working now in that field. And so I would absolutely encourage folks to see who those people are, like see within your connections and see if you're comfortable with perhaps some folks that are within your network that might be doing that work. I know there are some, like I'm thinking of even equivalent within while you're in your dissertation writing process. I've heard of like dissertation coaches, or, like I feel like every stage in life that includes a long process, arduous process, like has a coach. And so, I mean, it is an investment. I will not deny that. It is absolutely an investment. But I think to your point earlier, Laura Ann, about, that pre work, like it's an important piece to that, because yes, you can fill out the cover letter. Yes, you can fill out the resume. But if you don't believe and know that you're the person that you're trying to represent in that resume, it's going to be very hard for you to sell that, or to, convey that, I should say is a better word, convey that within a job interview, and to convey that convincingly to other people, because you first aren't there and you don't first believe it. So I think that, coaching and finding some of those folks in your network and folks that you are comfortable with, particularly to, help you along that path is an important step as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And I love, your conversation about identity and knowing yourself. And I'm probably going to reflect a lot later on like the story of your, like what is the story your data tells? What is the story that this part of your life tells? And like, it's not just about like listed off on the resume. Like what is the story of who you are that you're telling, is something I think is probably, I'm going to hold on to that, Tabitha. So thank you. Think about it for a while. So I want to ask our concluding question, which is just if you have any final advice to people who may be considering a career outside of academia as they plan for graduate school, or in it, or on their way to completion, what are some final just kind of words you might have for them?
That's a good one. So I'm going to repeat something here that admittedly isn't original, but I was so profoundly struck by it. I was like, I need to take this for myself, but also pass this on whenever I have an opportunity. Yeah. So I was, I don't even remember her name, and I'm gonna have to go back and send it. But I was speaking on a panel with a scholar of color. And one thing that she pointed out was that, often in academia, like you do your work within a context that really promotes a culture of individualism. You do your work in a context that promotes taking ownership for things in the way of like, this is my paper, I am the first name author, I have done this work with this person. Like the accolades that you have are very individually focused. What you often find, particularly when you move away from the academy, and when you also engage in work within public sector and partnership work, is that individualism fades very quickly. Like everything is now about a collective goal. And you may work hours, days, months, weeks on a product that your name will not be on that product. Your name will not appear maybe anywhere on that. You might not get the accolades that you're used to getting within the academy that puts you in the forefront. And that's a decision that you have to make and be okay with. Like choosing the humility and choosing to work collectively is something that you have to want and accept, I should say, because it's not the type of culture that's normal in the academy, but it's absolutely necessary to a lot of the work, particularly in education, that we do. And so I would just, for advice, I would just say to, know what you're going for. And if that individual accolade is very important to you, acknowledge that and make that active choice. But know that when you start to leave the academy, or you make a decision to leave, I should say, and choose another pathway, it doesn't look the same. And it's really important to embed humility in the work that you do on that path. And I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I'd add.
Wow, thank you.
It's been so good talking to you, Tabitha. I've just taken a lot of gems from what you said.
Yeah.
Like, even though I'm on the academic track, I'm like, oh, of course. You know what I'm saying? Because even thinking about when you are working, like you're thinking about the skills that you're building over time. If you're moving on to another school or to another job, or you decide that you want to start your own business, like all these things are relevant, whether you're in academia or you're not. So I really appreciate you sharing your experience. Because I think often when we think about academia, or at least we're not familiar or have the kind of background you had early in your life, it's just like, oh, the next thing you do is be a professor. You know what I mean? When actually being in academia can open up so many different possibilities that only recently folks have been experimenting with and thinking about. And so I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
Absolutely. And I would say, like, I hope that even with a choice to leave the academy, like I would hope that folks also consider, like, maybe there's possibility in the future and later on down the line as well. And I know we try to create that hard line of, like, once you leave, you can never come back. But I think there's so much value to what you can learn in very different contexts and different sectors and area. And generations behind us of students need that knowledge as well. And so I just hope that folks don't see it as like a closed door, but more like I can't finish this analogy, more like a revolving door. I don't know. We'll see.
Works for me.
Come back.
Yeah.
Any last words, Longer Ann, before we go?
I don't think I have others. I'm so appreciative for your time and your wisdom today. So I really appreciate it, Tabitha. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll see you again, hopefully soon.
I mean, I hope you do something before you leave, Ebony, like something distanced.
Yes. To celebrate and see folks before I'm out. You know what I'm saying? I'm not leaving before I say all my goodbyes.
Okay, good to know.
Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully be seeing you very soon, and sharing, what we've done here today. Thank you for joining us for We Need to Name This, a series where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academia. Join us for future episodes, and please leave a comment if there is a topic you hope that we discuss in the future. For more information, visit www.weneedtonamethis.com.